So go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself, and since we're a pretty small group, I might give everyone a chance to briefly introduce themselves. So I'm Jennifer Studebaker. I work at the Coffin Foundation. It's a private foundation located in Kansas City, Missouri, and we focus primarily on education and entrepreneurship with our new sort of focus going forward, centering those two around the idea of inclusive prosperity. So the title I hold at work, I don't think it really gives you a lot of insight into what I do, but my title is Project and Business Integration Specialist. Yeah, you know exactly what I do now, right? Yeah. All right. So it means I do a lot of different things related to projects. And one of the aspects of that that feeds into this is I do a lot of project management, which requires, learning how to work with teams, how to lead teams, and how to sort of build that structure that leads to a successful project. So we've got a few minutes here. Do you mind going around the room and maybe just briefly introducing yourself? I won't make you say a fun fact or anything. If you want to get started over here.
Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm an undergrad student in anthropology sociology by major at Western Connecticut State University. And I came here with a few of my classmates and my advisor to just network and learn and talk to people.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm Daniel. I work at the AAA.
I'm David Casagrande. I'm a professor of anthropology at Lehigh University, and we came with 5 students, 3 faculty.
Excellent.
I'm Catherine. I'm a retired medical anthropologist. Now back in school as a PhD student in Cleveland. And I am here essentially trying to decide what career I might be interested in outside of academia. My husband was in academia for many, many years. I sort of did it by proxy. And I kind of like to do something else. So I'm broadening my horizons.
Fair enough.
I'm Matt Emerson. I'm a professional archaeologist, and I represent the Registry of Professional Archaeologists.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to happy to have you all here today. And just another addendum. Part of the reason why I'm here at this conference is I was one of the working group leads on the Career Readiness Commission. So that's the group that Elizabeth and Ryle have been leading, started last May 2021, and I think we're looking at phase 2, which we'll find out about more later this afternoon. So I ended up doing this workshop because Elizabeth said, we really need somebody to do something around teamwork. And I'm like, I can do that. And these are kind of the brief overview of what I'm going to be walking through today. And my goal for this workshop is for you to leave this room and be like, I know what I'm going to do next time I need to lead a team. So my goal here is for you to really have practical tools to apply. And we're going to have a little interaction here too. So be ready to interact. So why work in a team? Here's my first prompt, and I want you all to take maybe like 2 minutes to think about it. Think of a time you were a part of a team. How did it go? All right, so you can think about it. And since we're a small group here, I won't make you pair up and share with each other. Did anybody have one come quickly to them they want to share? Yeah?
Oh, well, it just seems to me sometimes I work in teams and I get a lot out of it without putting much in, and then sometimes I work in teams and I put a lot in and I don't get much out of it.
That's fair. Yeah?
I've worked in a lot of teams. The teams that I felt like they worked the best were the ones where there wasn't one person who dominated it. As soon as one person dominates a team, it's not a team. It's that one person and a bunch of minions who then they're shut down, they keep their mouths shut, and you don't get their ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if you have everybody all exactly even, you wind up just marching around in circles, you get lots of ideas and no decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so there must somehow, some way be a balance between these two things.
Yeah. All right, can you get maybe one more share? And it can be in any setting too. One of the things I'm going to cover is like you do teamwork as a volunteer, you do teamwork as a student, those wonderful group projects. that maybe anthropology professors could assign more of, but you've likely experienced at least one of them.
I've worked on a bunch of teams too. I mean, I think it depends on the context. I've worked search and rescue for a number of years, and you've got to have at least one person, maybe two, leading the whole thing. Otherwise, things get really screwed up fast, and then people die. On the other hand, anthropology teams, I've worked on committees with 36 people on them, like at Kaplan University, where people would discuss things, and at the end, the action item was, we need to discuss this more. So I think it depends on the context and what the stakes are.
Yeah, so I think all the examples you shared lead into my Dilbert commercials or cartoons really well. So I'll read it out for maybe the people who are following along online. So the top one says, do you need any help on your project? No, I try to avoid the scourge of teamwork whenever possible. Isn't there any way I can be of service? Maybe you could offer to help someone I hate. And then the one on the bottom, I think, is where you guys were really resonating. I added all the project features that each of you demanded. Now our product is a worthless hodgepodge of complexity. I appreciate your input. I couldn't have failed without you. Teamwork. So I think teamwork gets a bit of a bad rap. You know, and if you are a fan of reality TV shows, I am, you know, whenever they're like, you're working in teams, there's very rarely that there's like cheers at the idea of that. So I think our culture really sets us up as like this idea of being an individual contributor, and that, you know, it's about showing what you can do, not what you can do as a part of a collective. And, you know, in anthropology, and I don't know if this is always true of archaeologists or those that work in labs, but there's this sort of vision of the lone wolf anthropologist out in the field, hiding in those bushes, as Jillian said, you know, watching, taking notes alone. And slowly embedding themselves. But I like this cartoon because it demonstrates that being a lone wolf isn't always that great. And I think biologically, usually they're not mentally well if you've got a wolf on its own. So he says, proud, independent, resourceful, and cold. So it's hard out there by yourself. And on the right, we've got this one that says, we like to bring together people from radically different fields and wait for the friction to produce heat, light, and magic. Sometimes it takes a while. So one of the things that I think is really important to emphasize, if you're going to be working outside of academia, you're going to be usually working with people from other disciplines. So learning how to be a part of a team where you don't all have sort of that shared language from the get-go is really important. All right, so moving into what I started with, you know, why work in a team? Why would we want to subject ourselves to this, the drama, the politics, you know, the extra work? But there's a lot of benefits that can outweigh maybe some of those challenges that you might face. And I think I can hopefully give you some tools to like address those challenges and anticipate them before they become issues. So our benefits are that division of labor, you know, you're not alone. You don't have to do all the work yourself. And I think this is something that, you know, to your point, sometimes you have that leader that domineers and does all the work themselves. You know, as a leader, I think it's on you to recognize that you do not have everything needed to do this, and you need to ask for help. And people, if they're participating in your team, they're usually willing to assist. Next is that sharing of expertise. You know, so as an anthropologist, you might have a unique perspective, but there might be contexts where having an economist or, you know, a designer in the room is really important in terms of producing the product that you're looking for. And also having that diverse perspective. So your lived experience and the, you know, life that you've lived has led you to see things a certain way. Having somebody with a different background in the room gives you the opportunity to like maybe miss or like catch some of those potential pitfalls that you're just blind to. And it doesn't mean that you're bad. It doesn't mean that you have failed to anticipate all of the options. By having a diverse group present, you help, you know, work ahead and anticipate some of those particular issues. Next is quality control. You know, sometimes when it's just you don't know if you're doing a good job, and having other people around you, when you get some little validation to find out if you're doing a good job. But in other cases, you might have people who challenge you, and the end product is better because they challenged you. Again, with the quality control, a lot of times we do projects that, you know, they're kind of one-offs and they go and die. if you want something to be sustainable, especially within an organization, you want to have ambassadors for the ideas or the project that you've worked on. So by having more than one person that's not just you, say you work on an initiative that you feel really strongly about, but you end up leaving the company, that's not going to persist unless there's other people that you've worked with that are going to champion that idea or that approach. Also social connection, or, we're social animals, it's nice to hang out. Sometimes you get to do a little chit chat before you dive into the business. And I think, in the right contexts, teams can be a really great way for people to find meaning and value in their work. It gives you opportunity to feel like a part of a bigger thing than yourself, and also have that support when you need it. Next, these two kind of tie into each other, but innovation and co-creation. So I think it's fair to say a lot of times the end product, other than in our Dilbert commercial earlier, or cartoon earlier, I keep saying commercial, our Dilbert cartoon earlier, a lot of times the product is better and there's maybe new innovations added because you've worked together rather than independently. Because I think it's always important to remember, like, those great inventors who have the aha, a lot of times they're working in labs or they're working with other people where they're building on the work that other people have already done, and just having conversations with other people can often give that spark that leads to what seems like the lone sort of inventor or discoverer is actually built on a lot of interactions that they've had with other people throughout their lives. So some of the team environments you might encounter, we're going to be really focused on the workplace here because this is building careers in anthropology. But I found that a lot of my teamwork I've done has been in volunteering contexts. So the Career Readiness Commission is an example of something that was fully volunteer based. And I got a great experience in leading a team there. But you might encounter them in your church if you're a member of a religious institution, organizing that bake sale or that garage sale, or organizing events, organizing rallies. There's a lot of opportunities where teamwork is really important in terms of moving ideas forward. And I also included community building here because if you want to build connections, you often need to partner with others with shared interests and goals. So we have more formal structures of associations that you can do that kind of teamwork through. But also if you see like a gap, there may be an opportunity like the Career Readiness Commission to go outside of those formal structures and build a community of your own. But that's not something you can do alone. There's no way you can do community building by yourself, because otherwise it's not much of a community. All right. So I use kind of a shorthand to dive into what are some of the aspects of a successful team. A lot of these are repeated throughout the literature, but I picked this book because it's one I've read recently, and I think it does a really good job of sort of like noting some of the highlights that this is talking about business culture in the larger sense, but I think it's also true within smaller teams. So these are sort of the ingredients of a successful team. And so this book, it's the Culture Puzzle, Harnessing the Forces That Drive Your Organization's Success. And it's a group of anthropologists. I believe most of them are at UPenn. And this just came out last year. Really easy read, really fun. And it's a good one, maybe if you're working in a non-academic context, that you can kind of introduce people. And Gillian Ted's Anthrovision being another great book to kind of introduce anthropology into the conversation. Because I would say this book is written for a business audience. But how they sort of break down an organization is these are the key ingredients you need to be successful. The first one is vision, having a shared vision or goal that you're all working towards. I think one of the things that really can sink a team or any organization you're in is when everybody looks around and says, why are we here? If you don't have like a shared goal and a shared reason that you're here, maybe you should all be doing something else. So having a really clear goal that you're all working towards, that everyone has an understanding of. They may not all have an agreement in terms of how you're going to get there, and that can be part of the process. But having that shared vision or goal that everyone is like, I care about this, and that's why I'm here. Next is interest. So you want to make sure that all of your team members know their role and feel engaged. So a lot of times you're going to have people that you work with that, you know, in a business context, maybe not everybody's super thrilled to be there. You know, they might have been assigned to this by their boss, like, you're on this project now, have fun, go do whatever. And it's your role as a leader. And it's also something you can do as a participant on the team too, is learn how to like harness people's interest. So if you notice that somebody in your group is feeling disengaged, or, you know, not speaking up, not participating, take the time to sit down with them and be like, hey, you know, I know you're a part of this. What do you enjoy doing? What do you value? And really learn how to draw out people's passions and apply it towards the work that you're doing. Next is habit. So here's our habitus from Bordeaux. You know, what are the shared norms and way of doing? So we're going to come back to this norms idea later too. But you want to establish those rituals. You want to have a clear sort of set of, you know, this is how we do things here. Because it gives people a starting point in terms of working together and moving forward. Because I think when you leave people on their own, they may figure out stuff on their own. But if you don't have a sort of shared understanding of how you're going to approach things, that's how you can sometimes end up with the gobbledygook of, you know, a mishmash. Or everyone is like, okay, well, we're going to discuss this again next week. And if you don't have the shared norm of like, no, we are writing action items, and the action items are going to be actual tasks that need to be completed. And setting that norm of, say, at the end of every meeting, okay, we're going to discuss next steps, and I'm going to say them out loud. And after this, you're either going to get an email in terms of what you're going to be doing, or you assign it in some project management software. And the last point they have there too is innovation. So leave space for change and growth. You know, you may have like a really, you know, set vision in terms of what you're trying to do, but, you know, teams are a journey. So like giving space to breathe to that point where you said, where you have leaders that, you know, this is my way or the highway, we're not doing anything else. Recognize like where you can give space to breathe. So there may be in some cases where you're like, that is really out of scope of what we're trying to do today. I appreciate your feedback. Maybe we can try that on the next one. You know, so looking at ways that you can acknowledge people's contributions, but in other cases, it might be like, that's a really good idea, and we're going to do that. And giving yourself space to pivot and move forward in new directions. All right. So, oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'm just gonna make a quick comment, is that that's something a lot of younger faculty have been mentoring about, is that when you have an idea and you want to bring it to committee, it's a good idea to question with other faculty who will be at that committee before the committee.
Yeah.
That way you can socialize an idea. And if it isn't appropriate, other members are going to remind you, well, don't bring that up this time, we'll bring that up next month.
Yeah.
It's a good way of, you know, changing that dynamic very easily and respectfully too.
Or if
Yeah.
you did this way, then so-and-so will be more receptive.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Or like, you know, Daniel and I were discussing this earlier.
Yeah,
And you
right,
bring it up,
right.
yeah. And that what that does is that it also doesn't intimidate people quite as easily as the lone wolf comes in and says, well, I got this figured out.
Yeah, exactly.
And so other team members say, oh, they've already talked about this. As department chair, you know about that, too, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I really love that you use the word socialize. So it's one of those buzzwords that I remember first hearing in like a business context where I was like, what the hell is that? You know, socializing, like, and I think it's a really good word to kind of, and it's a good anthropology word I think we should use to describe sort of this practice of exposing people to ideas and listening to that feedback and like spreading it around before you try and move forward with it. So
But you might find that half the committee is not interested in your idea at all.
yeah, and I'll say, you know, I've had that experience before where, you know, you go around and talk to some people and some people are like, yeah, that's great. And then you go talk to other people and they're like, well, actually, did you think about this? And you're like, oh, yeah, good point. So you have to go back to the other people and be like, all right, we're going to try this first. And then we'll go back to this maybe later, you know? So learning how to pivot and listen to people's feedback, because yeah, you aren't alone. And you might use that to your advantage rather than to your detriment. So as a team leader, and I think this is stuff that you as a team member can push for too, I want to go through this idea of team building. So this is kind of one of those HR buzzwords that you might hear used. And usually when you see it used, it's in the context of their group activities where it's like, icebreakers, we can go do trust falls, we're gonna have a picnic, it's all about getting to know each other. And other ways I've seen it done too, is like, learning to understand your team through these personality tests. So I've taken the DISC. I actually find it pretty useful as like a tool in thinking about things, though I will not go into it right now. You should look up the history of the author of the book that the DISC is based on. He is also the writer of the Wonder Woman comics. So it's pretty wild if you learn what the DISC originally stood for.
You gotta invent the polygraph.
Yeah. So then there's also the strengths test. So this is from, I believe it's Clifton. And then the Myers-Briggs, which also has quite the wild history there too, not really rooted in any psychology. So these are kind of like shorthands you could be using, but my recommendation for you as an anthropologist is like, I think group activities are great, but the first thing you should start with is using your anthropological training to observe, listen, and create space for people to show up at the level that they feel comfortable. And, I put food as a plus, but I think one of the things you want to do before you dive into the group activities is to understand who you're working with, So for example, I have a coworker that she's due in August, and I had one of the team members come to me like, well, you have to plan a baby shower, and I was like, she will hate that. She's super introverted. She's, been working remotely. She would not love it if we did a virtual baby shower with a bunch of like diaper jokes, probably her worst nightmare to be the center of attention and have everybody focusing on that. But, kind of the pivot there is I went and talked to my friend who's going to have the baby. And I said, what would you feel comfortable with in terms of a team building activity? And we're planning on doing, bring your fur baby to the dog park team building activity where we're all going to bring our dogs and hang out at one of the bars in Kansas City that has like a dog park set up. And it's something where she can hang out and feel comfortable and have her puppy there if she wants him. But it'll be a setting that's more, I would say, like appropriate or acceptable to her. So when you think about team building, if you're going to do food and your entire team's vegans, don't bring barbecue. It's really learning to understand what people value and what they'd appreciate. Because I follow the anti-work Reddit and seeing some of the appreciation gifts that people get, where it's sometimes giving people gifts can be worse than giving them nothing at all. And again, this kind of moves into this idea of fostering psychological safety. So a lot of this is advice for leaders, but it's also stuff that I think you as, maybe an employee in a business context where you're not the leader can still model and encourage your leaders to adopt. Is one, model the behavior that you want. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, Myers-Briggs is a good example of finding out who's in the room without the hierarchy.
Yeah.
In fact, it's designed to eliminate hierarchy because it says the pros and cons of each personality context. And so I've actually done it with deans, provosts, and chancellors and faculty all in one room at the same time having the test administrated. And what it does is it really kind of describes intellectual and personality diversity in the room without saying, here's the person who's the chancellor and here's the person who's 40 years as a faculty member or something like that. So in that way, I think it's worth the exercise to go through something like that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about say that Myers-Briggs thing is I would hope you would do like a follow-up workshop where everyone has to talk about it together, because I think having this sort of shared experience where everyone is on the same level, like they all got their reports right now and they're looking at them and they're like, oh, I'm a ID or a DI or I'm a ENTP, they're, curious and they're kind of in this exploring moment with each other.
It does eliminate the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Because we found that one of our leaders was someone who was not outgoing, was, very shy and introverted and not well with groups, but they were the leader. And we all kind of thought that was funny.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. So when you're modeling that behavior that you want to ask questions when you don't know the answer. I think that's a good one to start with, admitting your ignorance. You don't have to know everything. And I think that models the opportunity for other people to ask questions when they don't know. Another one is giving credit where it's due. So say you're in a meeting and one of your coworkers says something that's really insightful, but no one really reacts to it, but you want to re-emphasize it. Make sure you say, hey, I think what Susan said over there was really insightful. We should probably try and apply it this way. So learning how to, share the love with those that you work with. Also, notice those patterns of participation. So as an anthropologist, you know how to observe and listen, and you may notice that there are certain people who are less engaged than others, and knowing who they are and getting to know them might give you the opportunity to create more acceptable ways for them to engage. So if you have somebody that's, say, very introverted, they're never going to speak in a meeting, especially if the boss is there. One of the tools that we've used in my work is introducing post-meeting like surveys, and you want to try and avoid survey fatigue, but on those big meetings where you really want to get everybody's insights, we'll do an anonymous survey where everybody can indicate, like their comfort levels and also note any questions they had or any challenges they experienced. And it's fully anonymous and they don't have to worry about, who that is going to come back to them, but they can express their ideas. And also one of the things that we do with those surveys is we give a big window. So there's some people who might leave the meeting that immediately they're like, I don't know how I feel about that. But 2 days later, they're like, okay, I know what I think we should be doing next. And they have the opportunity to go and give that feedback post. And I think another opportunity too, so this is sort of I've talked about the post meeting, but when it comes to pre-meetings, recognizing that a lot of people have different ways of processing information, that if you have stuff you want people to read and you want them to think about it and you want them to come with questions, give them enough time to do that. Don't send it 2 minutes before the meeting and say, here's my entire report. I want you to be able to ask me about it. Or, here's this article we're going to be diving into. You want to make sure that people have like maybe at minimum 2 days, but you really know your work culture best in terms of what people are going to do. So for academia, it might be you need to give them like 3 weeks, if you really want to dive into it. One thing that I've seen as a pitfall when you do kind of collect that survey data or collect feedback from people is if you don't act on that feedback, people will feel like you're not listening. And in some cases, you're not going to act on it in terms of doing whatever they suggested, but it's still important to acknowledge that you heard them and explain why you're not going to apply that if you're not doing it. And also, if you do end up using their idea, give them credit, and I think that builds a strong positive culture that you're working with. And last, have compassion with yourself and others. We're human. Sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you forget the attachment. Sometimes you forgot the meeting was happening. So rather than going into that doom spiral, communicate with people like, hey, I'm sorry this happened, or hey, I've got to go take care of my kids, my dog's sick. Model that humanness so that other people know that that humanness is welcome. All right. And I included this graphic. So this is based on work that Amy Edmondson did around psychological safety. And I think it does a really great job of sort of modeling how psychological safety shows up in the workplace. So along the left side here, I think it's left for you too, is the psychological safety from low to high. And then along the bottom is performance standards from low to high. So in this bottom corner here, we've got the apathy zone. So when people don't feel safe, but they also feel like performance doesn't really matter, they show up to work, kind of apathetic. Like they're like, well, I don't know what we're working towards. We don't have a vision. I'm here, I have to get paid, so I'm going to hang out. Followed by, if you've got high performance standard expectations, but low psychological safety, you're going to trigger people into an anxiety zone. So this is where, they're just trying to cope. They're in survival mode. They're not going to be innovative. They're not going to take risks. They're just going to try and make it through the day till they can get home. Whereas if you move into positive, into that psychological safety is high, but you lack, clear performance standards in terms of what's expected for people, you're going to land at a comfort zone. So people are open, they get along, but they're not really feeling challenged. They're not feeling like they're going anywhere. And some people might be cool with that, but there's other people who will leave if they feel like that's the case. And so the optimal sort of zone that you want to move into here is the learning zone, where you have that Psychological safety. So people are allowed to ask questions. People are allowed to say, I don't know, but I want to know more. And they have the opportunity to ask questions, take risks, try new things. But they also recognize that, like, if I do this, I'll also be celebrated. So you'll be acknowledged, people will see the work that you've done. And that activates people into that sort of learning zone where they're being innovative and you have a lot of work getting done. All right, so this is some kind of tools, I would say, in terms of how to tackle working in a team. So these are the steps I would take if I were going to be starting a team. So the first is establishing norms. So norms are those shared expectations on how you work as a team. So an example of that is we only communicate via email unless it's an emergency. You know, so you're not expecting any texts or phone calls on Saturdays from your coworkers unless something is on fire. And that gives you the opportunity to enjoy your weekend because you don't have to worry about checking your phone to see if you got any texts. Next is defining roles. So here I've included what's called like a RACI, or sometimes people will say RACI. And this is just a tool, and it's a grid where you go through each individual and then you note like the tasks that we're going to be doing. And then you assign sort of their level of responsibility for those tasks. And it's a really great tool if you're at the start of like maybe a large project where there's a lot of intersections in terms of who's doing what. And you go through and you note who is responsible. So this is the person that is responsible for completing that task. And you have the person that's accountable. So in that case, it might be somebody that's supervising the person completing the task. And then consulted. So this is someone that you're going to bring in to advise on something, but they may not be doing the actual work. So for example, one of the projects I'm working on right now is a website redesign or refresh. And one of the people that's consulted on that work is our brand manager. So she is not doing the work of redesigning the website. She's the one that's going to look at the designs, react to them, and say whether they're in line with our branding and give any suggestions in terms of altering it. And then the fourth one here is informed. So this might be the case of like a supervisor or somebody else on a different team that they don't have to be involved in the daily work, but you want them to know what you're doing. So you keep them up to date, whether it's like a regular email or whether you have a one-on-one with them on a regular basis in terms of making sure that they understand where the work is at and what status it's at. And then sort of the next step you want to dive in, and these are kind of part of the planning process, the establishing norms and roles. But as part of the planning process, you want to set your expectations, identify the processes you'll be using. So within your organization, there might be specific ways you do things. So for example, at the Kauffman Foundation, we have sort of a set suite of documents we need to fill out whenever we're initiating a project so that everybody has a point of reference to see what's going on. And then also you want to establish deadlines and check-ins. So it's a lot easier if you sort of set up the architecture at the start of your project in terms of like, this is when we think we can realistically achieve this, end goal, and then build back from that and put in check-ins or milestones, I've also heard them called, in terms of, making sure you're hitting those key marks in terms of getting the work done. And also one of the things that you need to be ready to do is pivot if you realize, oh, we don't know what our new branding is, so we can't redo the website right now. We need to make sure that we have that completed before we can move ahead with the other steps. And last is the leader, and also I think it's the responsibility too as a team member, you need to communicate. So you want to have those set check-ins so everybody knows where you're at, everybody understands where the project is and when they need to jump in, but you want to have a shared channel, an email thread, or a tool for communicating progress that people expect. So in some cases, it might be a Slack channel. If you've used that before, it could be an email thread that everybody just replies to. It could be like a saved document that people can come to and see the status. You want to have an understanding it so people don't have that embarrassing experience of like, hey, you're part of that group or you're on that project. What she's doing, and you're like, yeah, I haven't heard anything for like 3 months. Am I still responsible for that? You want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So I'm going to jump into this quick exercise. I don't think I'm going to give us the full time I was planning on, so we can maybe do this together. Yeah.
Really quick comment. I'm not sure Google still offers this, but it works really well. You can set up a Google site in about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And it has a section where people can do commentary. So you can have, in other words, you have the links there for your milestones and your team members and who to contact. But there's also a notes thing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's great because it gives you a record of the project and it's all in one spot. And the way to get it is you just go through your email, you click on your icon and the Google site's right there. I think
Nice.
they still provide that Google site.
Yeah, I'm not
so
sure
much
if I've
easier than
used that one
it's
before.
easier than that.
Well, on that note, I'm coming to come back to this. Let's jump ahead really quick. So these are just examples of some tools for collaboration and communication. Looks like this one floated in front of it, but these are just ones that you can use them for both, but it's project management and communication. So Teamwork, Asana, Monday.com, Microsoft Teams are examples of some of the platforms that people use in terms of project management. And these ones on the right side here are kind of more communication mediums, but you can use Zoom to communicate. You can be using the phone to follow up with people, using your email and Google Drive. So I don't know if that notes program is a part of that. You can use Google Drive to collaborate. Also Box is another one that some companies have, or SharePoint, I think is the Microsoft version. So there's a lot of ways that you can have people interact together. All right, so I'm going to move back to this one, and I think we can give ourselves maybe 5 minutes before I wrap up. So I want to just take a moment to maybe think of, let's do 2 norms that if we were all working on a project together that we would want to have. All right. So these are sort of shared understandings of, say we're all going to write a paper together. What are the norms that we want to set?
Never email an attachment.
Never email an attachment.
Only use shared documents. So it could be Google Drive, it could be SharePoint. Do that.
Put it in the folder.
Never email an attachment.
All right.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I use SharePoint a lot, but a lot of people don't know how to use SharePoint. So that's a cryptic interface.
Yeah, so sometimes as a leader, and I had to do this in some of the career readiness commission work, you're going to have to maybe do a quick tutorial. I taught a lot of people how to use Google Drive. So yeah, and again, maybe that's one of those cultural things too. If it's not sort of the company standard too, make sure you're using whatever is expected.
And a lot of people don't afford the Adobe product, the latest Adobe products that you can mark up docs.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people don't have it. It's expensive.
Yeah, so thinking about the accessibility of the tools that people have. Yeah, Google Drive is easy because it's free. All right, what's maybe one other norm you would want?
It's making me think.
Yeah.
What I said earlier, this business of putting effort in and getting benefit out. One of my norms would be people being accountable as far as reporting what they've accomplished.
Yeah.
Since we met last.
Exactly.
That's the first thing, is starting a meeting. Is I used to do that. Is you'd say, okay, here are the action items we had at the last meeting. And everyone knew that it would be the first thing.
Yeah.
So, and of course, people have difficulty escaping now.
Yeah.
Get them on Zoom or something.
So they'll maybe rush and do it right before the meeting. Yeah.
I'm gonna push it down a level, because all of
Yeah.
these people are the CEO types.
Yeah.
I'm the middle level management, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, the ground to the ground, I'm in the middle. What I see is the failure in most teams is the people leave the room, or they leave the Zoom, or they leave the Teams call, and they don't know what they're supposed to do.
Exactly.
Or they know it's supposed to be done, but not who's supposed to do it. And as soon as it's not clear that you're responsible for it, it's someone else's problem.
Yep.
That's how you do that.
Yeah. So in terms of that's a good norm, is that all tasks are assigned to somebody and you are accountable for completing it, and you need to go check it off and wherever we've worked, or you need to report back to the group in our next meeting where it's at.
With deadlines.
Right, so that's
So then you have mine and I'll do it
that's
later.
an expected norm, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so sort of establishing it. So one thing I do post meetings is I'll send out the notes and then I'll list out the action items, and I will bold the name of the person responsible for that. And as a group leader, in some cases, it's your responsibility, to make sure people remember that they're supposed to do that, and maybe give them some leeway too. So don't message them 5 minutes before the meeting and be like, did you do that? Maybe a couple days in advance, be like, hey, reminder, we're gonna wanna talk about this. Please make sure you're ready. Otherwise, you need to tell me so we can pivot.
That's where
Yeah.
we're going. Because if you give a task to a laboratory technologist and say, I want this information in 2 weeks, and that for that 2 weeks, they spend 45 of their 40 hours a week working, and they didn't get a bathroom break, they're not gonna have it done,
Yep.
okay? So there has to be a way to keep this open and keep people engaged, and so that they don't just run screaming from your project. So they have to have a way to communicate to you what are their hurdles.
Yeah.
Didn't get it done. Why?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
how are we gonna address that problem?
Yeah,
That's where this coming in psychologically safe comes in.
Yes.
yeah,
So you say, it's okay to miss a deadline, but give us 48 hours notice that you're gonna do it.
exactly. And that's an example of another norm too, in terms of like, if you're drowning, you need to communicate at this point.
This is also something that school, like being in school, is really maladaptive.
Yeah,
Because the deadline on the syllabus is the deadline on the syllabus. If you didn't get it late, you lose a letter grade, But there's no like going back to your professor and saying, look, stuff came up. I'm gonna get it to you next week, is that all right? Like in real life, people are much more receptive to that because they need what you're producing for what they have to do, not just to be able to get their grades in on time.
mm-hmm.
And so I think it was weird for me having been a career changer, going back to school after having been in the working world for some time and realizing that like people might not be flexible about deadlines in that setting. And so if you're working with really junior people, there might be a learning curve to be like, no, you need to keep clear communication with me. It's not on you to produce like a deadline for else. That's not, it's not you, it's us. And that's how that looks.
Yeah, so like an example of a norm we have at the Kaufman Foundation is if you're going to assign somebody a task, you need to communicate with them first that they know it's coming. And one of the things that I try to do to anticipate any future issues is I'll ask them, what's a realistic deadline for you? And work with them. And in some cases, it might be like, okay, we need this tomorrow, but what else are you working on that you can maybe let wait? So learning how to prioritize and shift. And in some cases, it might be you need to pull in somebody else from another team to help out with the thing that they have to drop to move on with the urgent matter. So ideally, in the perfect world, you'll have planned your projects perfectly, and there's no fires.
I think that's a successful leader, though, who also communicates when the parameters change, that
Exactly.
that's okay that they change.
Yeah,
And that, we're all on the same team anyway, so we will just adjust our items.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way to be respected as a leader, very quickly.
yes, having that flexibility and that understanding and that compassion. And I think that leads into this slide really well. So like once you've got your team established, you keep it growing, you keep them learning, keep them engaged. And I think the first one is really like celebrate when it's appropriate. We got the project done. I think one of the things, like when you're in a culture of busy, there's this sort of move to like, okay, next thing, and you don't take a chance to be like, dude, we published an article in Practicing Anthropology. That's cool. I can add that to my resume. Having that moment of like celebration of like, we did it. Yes. In some cases there might be a pizza party, but in other cases people might be lactose intolerant and, you get drinks. Also, you want to make sure that you have time for people to reflect and recharge. So one of the things we do at our organization that I think is really good is we do project retrospectives. So we'll take, 30 minutes to an hour to sit down and be like, okay, what went well? Or what do we want to make sure we do not do again next year? And have the opportunity to reflect. And also, if you have the opportunity, give people space to recover. Maybe they just completed a big project and be like, you should take the weekend off, or you should go, take your weekend off, or you should go take a vacation, or, hey, maybe you can use today for professional development and go read a book, giving people the opportunity to kind of reset their batteries. And also create those shared and individual opportunities for learning. So I think one of the things that is really important is recognizing people's potential and giving them like new projects and ways to stretch themselves and succeed. But I think one of the failures that a lot of organizations have is they'll put people in roles that they're not ready for. And in some cases they may be ready soon. But if you don't give them the supports to get them ready or get them, prepared to take on that new task, they're going to fail and they're going to feel like they failed. When really it's you as an organization that has failed to prepare your staff to do the work that needs to be done. And I strongly believe in that everybody's trainable. Old dogs can't learn new tricks. And it's really important to give that coaching and mentoring opportunities for people, as well as, any skills training that they need. And I think like a really low barrier way to kind of support this sort of learning environment too. And I think my supervisor at the Kaufman does a really good job of this, is he always shares what he's reading. And I'm really impressed at how many books he can read. But think about ways that you can get people to engage and say like, hey, what have you read? Or, people are busy, sometimes they can't read books. What's a good podcast you've heard lately? and give them the opportunity to share. And it encourages people to be like, hey, maybe I'm gonna go check that out. And they'll move into sort of that learning space. And then sort of the last note here is, be open to change, in some cases you might lose a team member, and you might be really sad to not have them on your team, but also recognize they might be going on to do something in the future that is going to positively impact you if you maintain a positive relationship. So learning how to sort of roll with the punches and maintain that sort of support of your colleagues as they move around. So here's a few recommended resources I wanted to share. These are mine personally. These are not like the list of literature, but definitely check out the Career Readiness Commission if you haven't already. I did have someone ask me today if this is only anthropology focused, and it is currently. So it's about the anthropology field, not all careers everywhere in terms of readiness. But I think anthropology can apply to all careers. And on the over here, I've included a couple podcasts that I'm a fan of. So these aren't actually anthropologists. I think they're working in more organizational science and change management. But Dr. Kevin Sansbury, there with the Toxic Leadership Tales of Transformation podcast. He's been a consultant that we've worked with at the Kauffman Foundation. And I have a lot of credit in terms of like my understanding of leadership and how to build positive work environments. And I found his podcast very therapeutic as having worked in some less than fun team environments. So I recommend checking him out. You can also follow him on LinkedIn. He does a lot of great live streams. Also on the right here, this is the Leading Transformational Change podcast from Heart Management. I think they're based out of Sweden. So it's kind of fun to get that European focus, but they're diving into a lot of stuff that I think has anthropological implications in terms of how to work within organizations and that sort of institutional and change management focus. And then on the bottom right here, I included Jillian's other book, The Silo Effect. I found it a really great sort of image of like when teams can go very wrong in terms of how silos can lead to, poor communication, duplicative work, and in some places the downfall of certain companies or even entire industries, versus, where is it positive and how do you create those learning environments where people work together collaboratively. So I really recommend that book. Also, again, The Culture Puzzle. And this one on the right here, this is Nilofer Merchant. She'd worked at Apple in their product development. And I really found this book a really great tool, sort of based book for doing project management, thinking about collaborative strategy. So how do you get everybody on board around that vision? So I think it's kind of more at the higher strategic level, but I think there's kind of points that would be really useful in the teamwork context. So I want to thank thank Elizabeth and Ryle for inviting me to participate, as well as my supervisors, Kim Farley and Larry Jacob at the Kauffman Foundation, for allowing me to be here today. And I also want to thank some of the teachers I've had around leadership and facilitation. So Valerie Bockstedt, she is a consultant that participated in some facilitation trainings for us at the Kauffman Foundation. She's really cool. I think she's specialized in like strategic design for companies. Then again, Dr. Kevin Sansbury, as well as Dr. Ann Hackett, who is sort of our learning guru at the Kauffman Foundation in terms of, getting us to do our DISC, evaluations and talk about how we communicate with each other. And again, I want to thank the conference as well as Fordham University for having us here. So I think we're out of time, but if you want to hang for a few, I'm down for that.